Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yes, the Good News Cruise. It's something I've never really wanted to do, is to do a cruise. I've never had an ambition to do this, but it is one of our major priorities in the Archdiocese of Kansas City, Kansas, to strengthen marriage and family life. I believe that's where the real battle of culture society is today. And after a number of years of stiff-arming the group, that it's the EWTN, a lot of their personalities will be part of it, but anyway, we'll have fun. It's it's fun to be Catholic, and yeah. And they tell me, I have to do a lot of exercise for all of the gluttony that will happen on the cruise. And I was glad Mark Guile made a public confession last night of stealing. There was one cookie missing in that box. Mark, I hope you do go to confession tonight. It was, I was really edified by the talk last night. All the presentations have been good, but John Mozeliak's presentation and talking about his own faith, and I'd like us to think about, and as our lieutenant has reminded us, this has been a big emphasis of the Grand Prior, is one of the goals of the lieutenancy and of the order is to strengthen our lives spiritually, and to really, think about our faith and how we've come to become a Catholic. He talked about how his family, his upbringing was important in that, and I suspect for many of us that's true. And I love the presentation that Elizabeth gave us on Louis IX, having grown up here in St. Louis. And one of the things that the quotes of Louis IX at St. Louis that has always stuck with me was his mother Blanche, told him, to reverence the place of his baptism more than the place of his coronation. And when you think about it, our baptism was the most important event in our lives. There's nothing that will ever compare to what happened to us at our baptism, where we were given the very life of Jesus Christ. It was interesting, and I like the baseball connections. If you're not from St. Louis, you might not be aware of this. St. Louis used to have two baseball teams here. They have the Cardinals that are still here, but the St. Louis Browns. And in the 1940s, there was actually an all-St. Louis World Series. But Baltimore stole the Browns, and now they're the Baltimore Orioles. And, a lot of times when there's transitions like that, there's a player to be named later. And Bishop Rosansky is part of the compensation that Baltimore has given us for stealing the Browns. So I think we came out pretty well. When I was still here, there was still a St. Louis Browns fan club. I knew the president at the time, and he had actually written a book, and the title was Still Last in the American League. And the premise was that they were the worst team in baseball history, but now they're doing really well this year, so yes. But, I think it's good to hear and to think about, reflect on our own lives, what has been instrumental, what has given us this gift of our Christian faith and our Catholic faith that many others have not been blessed with. And with that comes also this responsibility to, the commission that Jesus gave to all the disciples was to make disciples. today's Mass, which is always a Marian Mass, and it was beautiful. The theme in the Gospel today, we were reflecting on Mary's visitation of Elizabeth, and that's one of my favorite places in the Holy Land is Ein Kerem. And it was part of the theme for World Youth Day today was really taken from that text in the early part of Luke's Gospel in the first chapter, where it says that Mary arose and went in haste to the hill country of Judea. So Mary's pregnant herself, but out of this she goes to spend time with her cousin Elizabeth to help her during the last stages of her pregnancy. And it's really at that point that we're told in Luke's Gospel again that when pregnant Elizabeth was the first really to identify Jesus as Lord, as she says to Mary, "How is it that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" And so that encounter, and of course, the unborn John the Baptist is leaping, we're told, in the womb of Elizabeth as he's in the presence of the unborn Jesus. And as part of an important part of my ministry has been in the pro-life effort, that passage I think always encapsulates the sanctity of the unborn life. And Pope Francis, as you may be aware, just beatified this family, this Polish family, and the mother was pregnant at the time of their death, and so the unborn child, I think he's the first unborn child to be recognized in this way. So, but I want to share a little bit with you my experience at World Youth Day this year. It was a powerful experience. It was the third World Youth Day that I had been privileged to go to, and it is an amazing experience when you're in the presence at the closing Mass of 1.5 million young people from over 180 countries. Essentially, almost every nation of the world was represented there. And one of the highlights of World Youth Day was the gathering of the American pilgrims, the Knights of Columbus. We love the Knights of Columbus. They helped to finance a gathering of the pilgrims from the United States. Now, there were between 300 and 400,000 actual people, young people that were registered for World Youth Day. But they expected, because this is what's happened in others, that the numbers would swell for the final events, and particularly for the vigil and for the Mass. And sure enough, there were 1.5 million. But there were 30,000 Catholic young people from the United States. So when you think of that in terms of the registered ones, it was close to 10% came from our country. And one night, we were gathered in this outdoor venue, this park, and at the beginning of it, there was a lot of praise and worship music. There were a lot of testimonies that some of the young people there gave about their own experience of the faith and their own encounters with Jesus, which were beautiful. And the American ambassador for Portugal was there with some of her staff. And she's a Jewish woman. She's a political appointee. She had invited the American bishops a couple nights before to come to the embassy. And initially, she had declined the invitation to be present for the gathering of Americans, but I guess we bishops didn't scare her off, and she changed her mind, and she came to it, and I actually was seated next to her through the event, and she had an opportunity to address the young people. And I think she was very moved by it. I don't think she had ever spoken to a crowd that large or that enthusiastic. And her message was pretty what you would expect for somebody in her position. But I think she, and I would say her staff as well, they commented to me, just how amazed they were at the energy of the young people and the enthusiasm and the joy of these young people. And I think they truly were moved. And I think the message that the young people communicated to them was probably more powerful than the ambassador's message to them. And she left, but some of our staff stayed. And so at one point, the Blessed Sacrament was processed into the to the venue. And it was beautiful to see these young adults drop to their knees on the ground in adoration of the Blessed Sacrament. And what had been this kind of almost raucous gathering, now there was this beautiful reverence, and the solitude was, as I would say, the solitude was deafening in some ways. The faith was so palpable. Bishop Barron preached at that event, and as you know, he's a gifted communicator, such a treasure really in the American church. And at one point, towards the end of his presentation, the young people, he was challenging them to be not afraid and to be bold in witnessing to their faith. And he mentioned at one point, he said, in the United States, we're a culture that oftentimes we're very preoccupied with safety. Some would say we're a very risk-adverse culture. We try to prevent any adverse outcomes. But Bishop Barron said to him, he said, when the symbol of your faith is a man nailed to a cross, safety is not a big priority. And he's right, and so he was challenging them, but I think for all of us, we all have that same challenge, What a gift our Catholic faith has been to us, and just to think about that, to think what makes your faith so powerful, and so much so that you would be part of an organization like this. You're part of the uber Catholics in our church and our diocese and our parishes. And, I just encourage you during this time to think about the individuals that have been important to you. Where is it that you've encountered Jesus in your life? What is it that's made your Catholic faith a priority for you? Because you wouldn't be here if that wasn't true. And, I think all of us, if we had the time to do it, it would be really fascinating and I think inspiring to hear how all of us came to know the Lord and experience the beauty of our Catholic faith. When you think about it, what other world figure could convene a group like the successor of Peter did in Lisbon? What other figure could bring a group of young people together like that? When St. John Paul first proposed this idea of World Youth Day, the curia around him, a majority of them thought this was a very bad idea. They thought this was a high-risk adventure. It was an unsafe thing, if you will, to do. And, in many ways you can understand why. They were never thinking in terms of 1 million plus, and some World Youth Days, I think the largest one ever was in the Philippines, and they say probably 5 million young people were at that one. But they were thinking maybe in the hundreds, thousands of young people, but coming from different places, different cultures, different languages. They thought this was a high-risk event, that this was a recipe for a riot. But John Paul knew, because he had worked with young adults through most of his priesthood as a college professor and as a campus ministry, that if you invited our young people to open their hearts and to invite Jesus into their hearts, that they would respond. And if you challenged young adults to heroism, to virtue, that they would also respond. And I think history has proved him right. I remember some years ago George Weigel was visiting Benedictine College, and I was part of a group, in a small group where we were having a conversation, and George Weigel, he's probably the best, he's written the best biography on John Paul, and he said that his last experience with the late Pope John Paul was the Advent before his death, so it would have been in December of 2004. And he said he had brought him a gift, which was one of these kind of coffee table books, and it was one of the American national parks. And he said, the Pope loved the outdoors, and even though he was a great intellectual, he liked books with pictures in them as well. And he wasn't of the mind that when you get the gift, you have to wait till Christmas to open it up. He opened it up right away. And he said he started page through it, and he came to a picture of Rocky Mountain National Park, and he said, Colorado, Denver. He said, yeah, World Youth Day. The American bishop said it wouldn't work. And I can say that with some safety because I wasn't a bishop yet at that time. But I know, and talking with Archbishop Aquila earlier, he was part of that. He was a priest at the time and helped with the organization of the liturgies there. But it was a transformative event in the American church, and many of our priests today trace their vocation to the experience at that World Youth Day. So I share that with you because, the church, and Pope Benedict used to say this, the church is young. And despite all of the things that sometimes we hear and the things that can discourage us, there is a core of young adults that are on fire with their faith, and we see a lot of evidence of that in our own society. I know you'll get an invitation to come back to St. Louis in January, I think, early January, late December, for the Sikh Conference, which is this national conference that's sponsored by the Fellowship of Catholic University Students Focus. And I encourage you, if you can, to come. It will inspire you, and you'll experience the young church that's very much alive. But as I reflect on that experience of World Youth Day, another kind of anecdote, there was at one point, our pilgrims from the Archdiocese, they were very heroic. There were about 100 of them, and most of them were sleeping on gym floors. We bishops, they took very good care of us. We were sleeping in hotels, so I didn't have the full experience, but I was able to go and celebrate Mass with them almost every day, except when we were having Mass with the Pope. And it was beautiful to see these young people who really were entering into a pilgrimage, and really, a rugged pilgrimage in many ways, in terms of, they had hoses set up for the showers, and it was quite an experience for them, quite different from some of the comforts that we usually enjoy here in America. But again, to see their eagerness. And in talking to the citizens of Lisbon, too, it was just interesting. I was visiting this one little delicatessen that was close to the hotel where we were staying. I became a preferred customer there. And I was asking them, I said, has this been good for your business? And this woman said, oh, yeah, it's been very good for business. But she said, but what's better is to see the joy of these young people. And, it is an experience that really gives you a great deal of hope. I was taking an Uber to meet up with our pilgrims at one place, and the Uber driver, I was asking him, I said, because they had to close off a lot of streets, it became very complicated to navigate through Lisbon. I said, this has probably complicated your life a bit. And he said, yeah. He said, but it's been good for business. And I said, well, do you have a faith? Are you a Christian? And he said, no. He said, I'm not any religion. I said, well, do you believe in God? He goes, yeah, I do. I believe there must be a God. He said, but what's drawn all these young people here? Why? And I said, Jesus Christ. They've encountered him. They've come to know him. We believe in this God that's revealed himself to us and makes himself present to us and can give us peace even in the midst of difficulties and adversities. And he said to me, he said, have you met this Jesus? I said, yes, I have. And you can meet him too. But I was thinking about that. We had a short time to try to do what I can to share with them the gift that my faith is to me. I shared with them, my father died before I was born, but my mother had this great faith, and she believed that as I would talk to our relatives as I got older, I was kind of immune to that, his death. But as I talked to people, that her faith, even in the midst of this great sorrowful event that she grieved my father's death, but she believed that her life wasn't over and that God was still with her and that God could even bring good out of this tragedy. And I was saying to him, that's how I got to know Jesus, was through my family, but it's also he's present to us in the Blessed Sacrament. I tried to explain to him what we believe about the Eucharist, but our ride was over. He wasn't ready for baptism. I felt like Philip in the Gospels, where he's in this chariot and he does baptize in that conversation. But I ask you to think about that, and maybe you've had experiences of that, but when people have asked you, why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you believe in the Catholic Church? What makes you committed to this? And to really reflect on it and to ponder it. And all of us should have, kind of our Uber speech or elevator speech. A time, we have these chance encounters sometimes with people, and we never know when the Lord can use that to plant a seed. And, I think what you've committed, and we welcome those that'll be invested. Thank you for your openness, and you're already really engaged in your parishes or your dioceses, or you wouldn't be here, so thank you for making this extra kind of commitment. And I think the mission of the order is so important. The personal holiness, and it will bring you into association with amazing people of faith, and I think that's one of the side benefits of being part of the order. But it's also because what we do in trying to support the Christians in the Holy Land and trying to keep the Christian presence there and trying to sustain these places, these historical places that are significant to us because they were where the most important things that God has done in our world happen, where Jesus Christ was born, where he was even conceived that we can go to, where he grew up, where he exercised his ministry and performed his miracles, and then, of course, to visit the Holy Sepulchre, where he made this extraordinary revelation of the depth of God's love for us, entering completely into our life and even into our suffering, even into death itself. And then, that was one of the startling things to me when I visited the Holy Sepulchre. I never envisioned the place of the resurrection being in such proximity to Calvary. Now, the gospel tells us that, but I'd never made that real physical association, and for the tomb to be right there, just steps away from where Calvary is. And, the Holy Land reveals that Jesus is not a mythological figure. He's real. He's a historical person. But he's more than a historical person that we read about in history. He's alive, and we can still encounter him today. And we experience that in a very special way in the Eucharist this morning, and the liturgies always at these meetings are beautiful, and they're so carefully planned, and the music always is inspiring. But the key thing is that Jesus Christ is really present to us. And the final exhortation I would make to you today is just encourage you, as you heard Bishop Cousins, in your diocese and your parishes, and this is the parish year for the Eucharistic revival, to really become engaged in that. Again, you're here because you have a love for the Eucharist, and it's always impressive to see how many of you will make time to be in the Adoration Chapel. But what a gift the Eucharist is, that this God who immersed himself into our human condition and became an embryo in the womb of Mary, that we shouldn't be surprised that he would figure out a way to be present to us through all time. And he would do that. He would come to us in under very humble appearances. And that's what we believe about the Eucharist. And every time that we receive this sacrament, if we're open to it and aware of what we're doing and who it is that we're encountering, every time can be a profound encounter for us with the living Jesus. And we can say to people, have you met Jesus? And we can say, yes. Yeah, we met him this morning. We were with him again. And I think we've all experienced that sometimes the difficulties, the complexity of life, sometimes of the responsibilities that you have in your marriages and your families, your professions and your businesses. Sometimes if we don't know Jesus, if we don't know him, we can get overwhelmed by the challenges that are with us. But if we know the Lord, then we can have peace and we can have serenity, even in the midst of difficulty and challenges and adversities. So again, thank you for all of our promotees today. Congratulations. And I think that's a recognition of all that you do in your diocese and parishes. Thank you for being willing to be so engaged. And thank you, new investees. I think you're going to find being part of this order will be a great blessing to you as well. And you know, the original Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, safety wasn't a big priority for them either. They risked everything to try to make sure that the pilgrims would be safe and that the Holy Lamb would be accessible and available. So let us be bold, let us be courageous, let us not be risk adverse as we live our Catholic faith. Let's be prepared to share the beauty and the truth of our Catholic faith with others. Amen.